Welcome to Behind the Build. I am your host, Jonathan Jacobs. And today I have with me a gentleman who has started a practice not here in Ontario, but in Canada. An incredibly talented architect. His name is Darcy Jones, and he is the founder and principal of Darcy Jones Architects. Before we get into today's episode, powered by Walden Homes, I want to speak to you about one of our brand new sponsors of the podcast, and that is Kaplan's Appliances. And yeah, we have a sponsor. It's a family-owned and operated business in Toronto, Canada for over 80 years. And Kaplan's Appliances is in its third generation of ownership. We at Walden have been working with them for 20 years. And over those 20 years, they've serviced our clients exceptionally, be it from the sales straight through the full cycle directly into service. And in keeping with the theme of generations, well, they have generational buyers. And why is it? It's because of their expertise and their knowledge on premium brands like Sub-Zero, Wolf, Miele, Jenn-Air, Fisher-Paykel, and more. On the outdoor experience, Lynx and Kalamazoo. What they really look for is to curate the right type of experience for you as an architect or a designer, and how that translates for your clients. They actually have this amazing in-store program with an in-house chef. They'll prepare meals for all of you on the appliances that you are probably going to want to have inside that beautiful home. If you're interested in learning more about them, please email me. My email address is Jonathan, that's JONATHAN @waldenhomes.ca, and I will connect you with one of their managers. We're doing it this way because clients have come to you for who you are, the experience that you deliver, the process that you deliver. And when you meet with the manager, well, they're going to understand what you're looking for in the experience for your clients. And through that introduction, you'll be introduced to the right rep that will speak your language. With all of that said, I look forward to making these introductions to you and Kaplan's Appliances. But also, I want to introduce you to today's episode. So without further ado, here it is. So Darcy, thank you for joining. It's a Saturday here on this recording. Actually, the second Saturday that we have participated in this endeavor.
Second time.
So the fun part of this, well, I don't know if you call it fun, but when we initially recorded last week, unfortunately, my computer's hard drive maxed out, and we lost the first half of our discussion. So we started again from the halfway point. So today, right now, this is going to be our re-recording of part one, the first half, and then you're gonna be able to hear we're doing a part two. So you'll be able to hear that one next week. All that said, let's get into it.
It's going to be better.
I appreciate your patience and taking some time. The both of us couldn't believe. We're like, oh, it's already been a week since we last spoke. Wow, that week went fast. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like life. So let's talk about the beginning of your life. Those early inspirations that led you into this career in some way.
Well, I was born in northern BC in Fort St. John, so I'm BC based, but I grew up in Abbotsford, which really was people will drive to Vancouver for work, but you didn't in those days. It was really another place.
Okay.
But when you were asking me last week, why I'm in architecture, I think it's a couple things that aren't always architectural. But the biggest one is we grew up in a subdivision that was kind of classic tract housing, that we were probably the fourth or fifth house being built in about 150 house subdivision.
Okay.
So my playground growing up was actually all the other houses being built. And I thought they're all wildly different, but I've driven back as an adult and they're all really quite similar. But so we take the scrap wood, build things, climb around in the trusses, and I was super comfortable with construction sites. They weren't mysterious places. But before I ever got any kind of idea that architecture was something I wanted to do, I was more into things like cars and trucks and taking apart toys and
Yes.
getting them back together, building models. So more objects, industrial design, so much so that I actually was kind of well on my path to apply to do automotive design in California after high school. And then it was just pretty onerous mostly just for tuition. So that like I had cars before I had my license, got real junkers, fixed them up. And someone must have kind of caught wind about that. Like a family friend said, "Hey, there's a job at this car dealership just in the last 2 years of high school." And it was just to be the lot boy who'd wash the cars, but I think I was pretty good at it. So they said, "Why don't you come inside and clean up all the trade-ins?" And so I don't really didn't realize it till a few years ago that that's probably why we do so much renovation, or why I don't think renovations are filler work, because these total junkers would come in, ex-cop cars, and my job was to make them look like new, and then they'd sell them again. And then I'd buy everything that people traded in that the dealership thought was just not marketable, but it was still, they were unique or super old or super rare. So for a couple of years, like it was really all about cars. And that's why I was going to take car design.
All right, so actually interesting on this point. I don't know that I had mentioned it to you that I was an assistant general manager of a car dealership here in Toronto
Oh
before
yeah.
getting into the construction industry. So I can appreciate this. I was so we had lot guys, and those guys
Yeah.
were key in ensuring that the place was functioning in the right way that you could sell cars, because
Yeah.
if they weren't doing their job correctly,
Yeah.
cars were not clean. They would sit on the lot, and that was just a lot of wasted money paying for the floor plan.
Yeah. Well, and that everything has potential. Like
Yeah.
there's everything under the hood can be fixed and everything broken can be made better.
Yep.
I don't think I was ever into hot rodding. Like I kind of like things the way they were meant first designed. That that never really appealed to me. Like kind of distorting them so much that original idea was screwed around with too much. But um,
Although I will say, there's nothing wrong with like a Singer Porsche.
no, they're awesome. Yeah. Well, and then that's that fine line of how much you have to keep to still sort of keep the soul of something.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, like as that was going on, this guy, I think it was his last year. He was a really kind teacher that was probably really chilled out because it was his last year. But he had us drafting, and it was a drafting class. But often you just did lettering, and you filled a whole page with 45-degree angles and then 30-degree angles. So, or he'd maybe dimension a bolt, like it was. But he sent something in our class, not just in me, that he said, "You guys want to just like learn how to draw a house, plan section elevation, and you can draw a dream house up," which ended up being pretty suburban, all of us.
Yeah.
Um, and then he said, "If you want to learn to do CAD on a computer, here's a computer I somehow tracked down, and I think it was MiniCAD in the days. This was 1990, so computers were super rare, let alone drawing on them.
Right.
And none of us really took to the CAD on the computer. I think it was just one thing too many to learn."
Mhm.
But going through that and like just being able to make something out of nothing, like you just an idea in your head and now you got this set of drawings. I think that stuck with me even because I didn't apply for architecture school for almost another couple of years later. I took time off between high school and university. So, but I was all then I started to be more connected to buildings. I got a job after I worked at a restaurant for a while. The guy that came in, he said, "Hey, my dad needs some help building a pig barn. So he needs some junior guys." So I did that for a while. I was the insulation person and I painted it, concrete forming. And so it wasn't very pretty, but it was still construction.
Yep.
Super gross. We had to eat our lunch next to the tank they drained the manure out of. And you got used to it. But that job made me think I got to go to university. There's better ways to make money. And that flood that happened a year or two ago, that atmospheric river they called it, but
Yeah.
it's actually happens on a cycle. So I was laid off in 1991 because the place flooded and the guy had to feed his pigs by rowing the boat out to the barn. So the gig was up, no more construction until the flood receded, and that's super common in Sumas Prairie.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay.
I went and had a couple other odd jobs sort of related to construction. And then a friend said, "Hey, you should apply to architecture school instead of going to BCIT, like instead of becoming a building technologist," which is what I figured this was headed to.
All right.
She got in and didn't go to BCIT in Burnaby and went to Winnipeg.
Interesting. Wow.
So it went pretty fast from like, I don't know what I want to do to I'm going to go to study architecture. That was happened in about a year and a half.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's a it's a pretty drastic transition from going and eating next to a bunch of pigs to realizing you're about to go in and study architecture.
It is, yeah. But I think there's this, like I mentioned, the how things are made and how they're figured out and how they're put together. I think that weaves through everything I've been interested in more than, and when you get those basics under your belt, and then architecture school, what I thought, what struck me most was it was just that there's an art and an idea and there's an intellectual aspect to it. Like there's this whole other layer that like a pig barn, I still think they're a cultural object, as much as they're super practical.
Right.
So that dimension, you just had no idea. And I would never have got that if I was just in building technology or became a CAD draftsman of some kind. Like, and that's to this day what I like, because there's this whole other flavor that you can try to explore, express as much as you want or as much as clients are into. That's what keeps it all worthwhile.
Right. Okay. And so you from there you go to Winnipeg, and,
Yeah.
and that's where the journey really starts to begin.
That's where it really started, yeah. So I didn't realize how much it rained in Abbotsford till I moved to the prairies, but their license plate says friendly Manitoba, which is kind of a cheesy thing to put on a license plate, but it really was a friendly place. And the sun was out all the time and it was old. It's like Chicago kind of era architecture.
Yeah.
And I lived pretty far from the school, so I was like out in these sort of prairie views a lot to and from school. And it was, I learned I'd rather like have snow and cold and a blue sky than mild and gray, which is what I have back home here now. So, but it was a great spot to go to school. And I think it was really one of the strongest architecture schools at that time in the country. Probably that school in Waterloo would have probably been the top ones.
Yeah.
Tons close behind it. Tons was a little bit quirkier and maybe less known.
Okay.
But there was a whole bunch of people retiring not too far after I got there that were kind of a real heyday of, early modernists that, were 50s and 60s, practiced in the 50s and 60s. But I don't think they do it anymore. But the first year is 100, 120 people, and you're all going to branch off into interior design or architecture or landscape or city planning after that common first year. And I think that's a real strength of those schools because you'd start kind of seeing what other people are doing.
Right.
And I mean, they were hardcore. They stood up the first day and said, like, okay, there's 100 of you here, 10 of you aren't going to make it. Have a nice day. And that's now it's such a business. Universities are like, with great inflation, and it's so the opposite right now that probably somewhere in the middle is good.
Right. Yeah.
And that was my second year living in Winnipeg. First year was just doing art history and linguistics and English and a lot of geography and anthropology. And I like those things enough to carry on if that subject matter. But it was a good background to what was in my time very technical architectural training. And you didn't know that because I didn't compare it to any other school.
Of course. How could you?
But like the guy who worked for Louis Kahn was still alive, and he taught me, and he was like, "Your line weights are crap. Like your sections, you don't do that in a section. Like heavy line with what you cut through, and thin line with what you're looking at behind the section." And that just like drill these ideas into you and do good drawings and make nice models. And so it was extremely rigorous place. And I think it wasn't technical like me going to BCIT or like Ryerson in its day, but it might as well have been for how what our building, like we learned how to design a septic field, and so it wasn't just super designy, but of course the thing I liked best was design studio, which we were allowed to just build our own little pockets and enclosures in this gym that was condemned. The floor sloped was caving away, so it wasn't good for basketball anymore. So they let out put the architecture people in
Well,
there.
depends on which way you're going.
Well, I was at the slope where if you let go of your table, your chair would roll back. This building was torn down eventually, but they're like, that's good for architecture students too. And so it was kind of wild in like how unsanitized it was. And, there was no locked doors, like people were working all the university was basically never shut, especially in the architecture building. But I was good at time management and would always rather go home, get some sleep, and come back. I think he did better work than the all-nighter kind of which sometimes I think was more about the optics of that you worked hard than what you actually did. But so then I left, graduated in 95, went back. In that time, my parents had moved back to Kamloops, moved to Kamloops, which was more central to the ginseng company.
Yep.
And they were a huge producer. They were producing more tons a year than I think anyone in the world at that time, even though Asian herb. And the market was really hot. The growing conditions were great in Kamloops because it's cold enough to not mold in the winter.
Okay.
I went and got a job for Nigel Baldwin and Roger Hughes used to have a firm in Vancouver. They're now Hughes Condon Marler. Well, that was basically a professional divorce, and I was
You're right in
Nigel's
the middle.
third employee, and but I didn't know AutoCAD, so I was just building models. And he maybe it grew to 5 or 6 when I worked there. So I think I worked there, I don't know, 5 or 6 months, and then he said, "Hey, I don't have enough work for you, but like you don't know AutoCAD, and I can't really." I think in that time he said, "I can't really afford to have a learning curve for you,
Right.
so you're laid off." And then
Hi.
in the meantime, my parents had been living out on a farm in Cherry Creek. It's just west of Kamloops, out where there used to be like cattle drives and cowboys, and like it's really has a lot of history in that part of Kamloops. So they said, we bought a piece of property, maybe you could design something on it, because it was a really cheap piece of property no one wanted because it had a really funny shape, hard to describe even. And my brother-in-law thought, oh, we shouldn't do that. Like you should just buy a place, or that's too difficult a lot. But as soon as you put a house on a property, the lot's crazy shape becomes irrelevant. So I moved to live with them on this farm and designed this house from a drafting desk in one of their spare rooms, kind of looking out over the neighbors where their cattle was and their orchard. So it was very rural for a year.
And
And
how were your lines on the drawings?
they were amazing. No, I didn't know how to, like, as good as my education was, I didn't know how to put a set of working drawings together,
Right.
which is another story I'll get into later, why I think how kids could learn that in school. So I had to ask a friend that I worked with at Nigel's, like, what's a dimension? Like, what's a grid line? Like, I didn't know the basics because I had to get a building permit for my mom and dad. And
Mhm.
I wasn't doing it, it was doing it for room and board, and they'd helped me with university. So I owed them. And then I just went to site every day when this thing was being built. So remember, I'm 23, or I was even 23 at the time.
Right.
Had an undergrad and had a really short, very non-related architecture experience so far because I just had built models.
Yeah. Yeah. Of course.
And so the builder, who was really young in hindsight, he was in his 40s. He was a second generation builder, and he's super patient with me. And I'd go to site and ask about this, and he'd say, go talk to that guy about getting wood windows. And then I didn't like that guy's wood windows. And there was no email, I didn't have a cell phone
And
till
faxing
15
wasn't
more years,
happening yet, right?
hardly. Like,
Yeah. So
and
you're driving or carrier
I was
pigeon.
just driving everywhere
Yeah.
and going to this. So basically, I wanted to make windows out of door jambs, and this wood company's like, that's crazy. And I was like, but can it be done? They're like, well, yeah. And then that kind of being inventive and innovative, I just realized if you just like work with people and like, let's find a way through this together. So some really patient people helped me learn a lot about wood frame construction. And
Right.
then I applied to schools all over because I knew I wanted to do a master's. And this house wasn't done yet; it was three-quarters done. And then I was going to go to the US, to New York or LA, and to Rice and Houston. Had got into a number of schools, but they were just so expensive. Like even in those days, it was $25,000 a year, which would be a dream today, but it's probably like 75 now.
Yeah.
And then I applied at Tons. It wasn't called Dalhousie in those days. So it
Called tons?
was called Technical University of Nova Scotia. Just to not go to the same school I went to undergrad, just to mix it
Yeah.
up a bit.
Yeah. You get a different
So
experience, get a different geography, all of it. Yeah.
yeah. So I flew out New Year's Eve. Like it was a red eye, like terrible red eye. No one was on it because they're all at New Year's parties, I guess. Like everyone just sleeping on seats. It felt more like a camper. And then I did another undergrad because they put me in the last two terms of their undergrad. So I have two bachelor's degrees, but the second one's kind of not the real deal because I just got advanced placement
Right.
and then started their master's and then went and did so lived there for 12 months. And then their co-op program is still super excellent. We like having students from it when the timing is right in our office. So I came back to Vancouver to work for an 8-month work term. I worked for Acton Johnson Austri, which there's no Johnson in the firm anymore. And they liked that I designed this house for my mom and dad. And then I got photos of it while I worked there. We got professional photos. Western Living magazine, which is like a regional prairies and west magazine, said they would publish it.
That's
So I,
uh,
I,
how did that feel?
I didn't know that would do anything. I just heard that's the thing you're supposed to do. You're supposed to get the thing finished and get it in a magazine. But that was more a tick in a box for me because I was trying to, they said, why don't you just like work on this building and do all the drawings? Again, I'm like 24, sorry, or 25. So I did a whole set of construction drawings and some construction admin. So it did work, not typically someone my age would do that they trusted me with,
Yeah.
which was another great experience, but it was very short. And then got these photos and then went back, decided I wanted to finish my master's in Manitoba,
Yeah.
partly just distance. I was having really big phone bills with my girlfriend at the time because she was back in Vancouver. And like,
People
and
don't,
just,
by the way, people don't, anyone listening right now that is what I would say like 35 and under, for if you're 35 and under, you need to understand this.
yes,
There was no Roam like home. There was no nationwide calling.
no, no,
Okay.
there's nothing.
Like
No,
this,
and you weren't on Skype or
no,
like, when's the last time I looked at a phone bill and quickly went to the bottom of the bill to see what long distance was?
right?
Like even our office, and we call all over to suppliers, the country a lot. Our long distance is like $20 a month for a business. It's crazy.
We used to have, you could have $100 a month sometimes in long
Oh no,
distance charges.
500 and 600 a month.
Well,
Yeah. Like, if the 2 hour conversations every day.
yeah,
But it wasn't a criticism of tons because my undergrad is from tons. It's not from Dalhousie.
yeah.
Same thing though. But it just was so far and distances were just really a big deal. And if you were going to come home for Christmas, the flight was super expensive. And,
Right.
um, there's no seat sales
Oh,
so
Expedia wasn't around then either.
but it was good to get to experience a different kind of school who
Yes.
they worked with them for the book that came out a couple years ago. And I think very highly of their co-op program and TMU's co-op programs. They both do it better than anyone in the country. And so we're very heavily a Dalhousie Ryerson or TMU office, just in a pretty organic way, not because I'm excluding anyone or
Yeah.
so I ended up with this kind of quirky. They said you can come back and just do your thesis, but you didn't do any of this course material for masters, and so you don't really qualify. Like we need to put you back. I'm like, I don't want to go back. Like I just want to be done. And then can like the house I drew for my mom and dad count? Can this work term I just did count? How about my anthropology from like forever ago? Can that count? And they're like, oh, fine. So they found a special loophole that the Ian McDonald was not the Ian McDonald Architect Toronto. Ian McDonald ran the School of Architecture in Winnipeg in the time that I went there. And there's a guy named Ron Keenberg, Icoy Architects, who I don't know if he practices anymore. And he said, I only had to go to Senate to try to find some special loophole for two people ever. It's you two. But it was kind of okay, but kind of a loophole. So I probably haven't been playing by the rules. That was the beginning of not playing by the rules, I would say.
I
Um,
mean, in fairness, I'll say this. I also didn't play by the rules in university.
yeah.
I had a similar thing happen with me. Anyhow, so yeah, go ahead.
Well, in the end, I think whoever was deciding yes or no, they could have said no, right? So, we weren't bullying our way through this, but
Yeah.
it let me have, probably be short in total time spent at university by about a year of if I had gone back to tons.
Yeah.
But probably the biggest reason that I've been practicing for 24 years, but I'm actually coming up licensed as an architect. I've only been licensed as an architect 9 years. And that it's because the month that I finished school in 1999, July, Western Living decided to kind of fast track and run this house that my parents did. And it was on the cover, and they said the kid did it. And it was kind of cheesy. I was a little bit embarrassed, but people are like, just take it. Like, press is press.
100%.
And so I got home, I'd been home about a week, not even, and
Yeah.
someone tracked me down by phoning my parents, and I don't know, Yellow Pages or maybe a telephone book.
Yeah.
I don't know how you did it in those days. And they said, you want to design a house for us? And so I didn't even have time to go get my first real job because now I have a master's degree. And so then I started designing their house for a fee
That's
that like,
crazy.
and that started my practice, just that sort of circumstance. And yes, I was lucky to have something in a magazine that I had actually done before I even did my master's, but that started all this.
I mean, that's a pretty unique
Like it's
jump.
right, it's like right place at the right time
Yeah.
times 10, right?
Yeah, but I mean, look, yes and no. I mean, you created these opportunities throughout all of it, right? And that's part of what I so enjoy about these conversations I've been having with people is that you create the opportunity.
Yeah, and I've known people, maybe even ones that have worked here, that like, that doing your house for your parents is kind of a rite of passage if the circumstances are right. Construction costs, unfortunately, are so high. I
Yes.
don't think it's much of a thing anymore. But I've known people that they did that and then they went back to work for someone else, or that was just too daunting and they didn't want to do that. So yes, you have to take opportunities. Or you might try it out and realize it's not for you because I don't think of it as a hustle, but it is a hustle to like, yeah, then what about the next job? What about the next job? But I was working from a spare bedroom.
Right.
My dad helped me buy a computer because I didn't even have a computer. So I did an entire bachelor, master's, and I didn't have my own computer. Like only rich people had laptops. That was crazy,
I
right?
yeah.
I didn't have my own computer until I was 27 years old. A big blue Mac that had like, well, it was a tower, but it was a silly looking thing.
Yeah.
And had to borrow some software from someone because I couldn't dream of paying for software. And
And
then
you
I
avoid doing the updates, so you don't have to pay. You don't have to pay for the registration.
yeah, a friend of mine from Manitoba FedEx me her Microsoft Office
Exactly.
and then I FedExed her CD-ROMs back, right? And that's the way it was because like did not have $400 or $500 to buy off. In fact, I think Office is cheaper now than
Yeah.
it was.
Oh,
It
now
was
now you pay monthly.
yeah, which is better because that would have been something I could have handled.
Yeah.
And then money was tight. The landlord would be knocking on our door, and we'd be hiding, pretending we're not in there. Partly because we had too many cats. There was a one cat policy, and we had two. Um, But he would even phone us and say, I know you're in there, you got to pay your rent. Like, I guess if there's a bit of struggle, it puts the fire in the attic and
Oh, totally. You know who had a similar story. Les, if you're still listening to this, Les Klein. Les Klein had that similar story where he was living in an illegal loft that he
like
described in Toronto, and it would look over like he'd finish like showering in this illegal loft, and he'd be looking out at the Gardiner Expressway, thinking, "Here I am, king of the world in this illegal loft with a bunch of other people."
like living not paying rent even.
Yeah, like the more or less almost
Just
like you.
like squatting.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I mean that would have suited my budget better, but yeah.
So anyhow, yeah, I part of why I say it is because I think it's funny that for those that are growing up nowadays, coming out of school, that are complaining about the cost of living, you have to understand the struggle has been real the whole time, dating back
Oh
decades
yeah.
and decades. It has
Yeah.
always been this struggle for making enough money to be able to live and literally living month to month. Like this is not an abnormal thing you're experiencing now. This is, here's Darcy talking about this from decades ago.
Yeah, 2000, 2001.
Right.
Yeah.
So sorry.
Which I still think
Go
seems
ahead.
like yesterday, but that's sign of getting older, right?
Yeah, so you get to the point now where this is the beginning of the practice. You're a couple of years into the practice, and this is what the struggle's like.
Yeah, and it was well, I think even practicing was a struggle. Like this is a nerdy detail, but we use PowerCAD. I didn't use AutoCAD because I used a Mac.
Yeah.
So then take your files and then you'd phone up the printer and then he'd send a zip disk, or you'd put your files on a zip disk and then the guy would come to your door and then he'd pick it up and then he'd take it back and then they print all your drawings and come back with your zip disk because they had to put them into plot files.
Yeah.
You did not make PDFs. There's no such thing as a PDF.
Yep.
So that just all that stuff costs so much money. You didn't email them. And now we joke our printer feels like they're down the hall because we email them and like 30 minutes later, like,
Yeah.
here's your
Yeah.
drawings.
Here's your stack.
Yeah.
I remember, to your point, I remember I remember when I was in university, and you were lucky if you could get like a 250 megabyte USB key to store
Yeah.
documents on to go print somewhere or do something, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, now like a tile salesman comes in and says, anyone wants some USB keys? Like with their name on them, and it's like it's junk. It's like a shitty pen, right? And then it gets everything gets cheaper and cheaper.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
we have better lives because of it. We don't waste time on the
Well, but that's it. Think about the
like
efficiency.
I think if you wanted to print these drawings, I almost think they needed the day, like or half a day, right? No, most of a day. So then I was started to work with in Kamloops. So I was in Vancouver in the West End, near Stanley Park,
Yeah.
in an apartment, and which is another story. I ended up designing the owner of the apartment's house, but we didn't know that I was his tenant, and because I had a whole fight with the landlord who said I didn't leave post-dated checks, and I did, but it slid under the couch when I went on holidays, and then he found it later and thought I planted it later to make my story look good. Like it was so, and he said the owner's going to sue you for like not paying this, and I said no, he's not. Well, then in the end, like I designed his house, and it was kind of funny ending to.
Yeah.
But so we had my first son was born when we lived in this apartment, and it was basically a big one bedroom. So there's a corner of the living room I could work in, and I'd be faxing people all day. And then sometimes builders would be like, I don't do faxes, and they didn't have cell phones. So then I said to one builder, can you set up a temporary phone line, put a little tarp in the corner, buy a fax machine, and then like so I can fax you. And mostly we use the fax to fax each other to say, call me.
It
So it was like
was the pager.
yeah, it was a pager. He would fax me and I'd fax him. And then because he didn't like writing, he would never write anything. That's not why he was a builder.
Yeah.
Builder because he liked to build.
All right.
And but these guys were patient with me. He was pushing 70 and I was 27 or 28. Like when I think back of like I'm that age and like really taking seriously what someone that age is saying, like they were really that was pretty big of them. But also I was curious to learn from them.
Right.
But we started to get to the point where people I'd be phoning people because you just phoned all the time. There was no email. And then we'd have a baby crying in the background. So that didn't work. So I bought an office on basically on a credit card. I bought a $42,000 office in a building, and I just did the math. So I go from having a practice where I would always meet people at their house, and they're like, "No, no, no, we're happy to come to your office." And I'd be like, "No, no, no, I'm happy to come to your house. That's a service I provide." Because I didn't have a spot for them to talk. And then when they did come, one time I could see them like, like this guy's at his IKEA like dining table and that wobbled, right? So it got too much where I couldn't be on the phone without like covering up the phone because of crying babies. Got this office, but it took me a year to renovate it on my own.
Right.
And it was just a room. It was 15 by 15 in a heritage building in 2023, I guess. And I'm still in that building, but I'm four spaces later. We just kept moving and getting bigger and better spots.
Yep.
But that was a super good thing to do in hindsight because I never have paid rent. I've never had a commercial landlord in our practice.
Right.
I've always bought a very scrappy space, disgusting sometimes, and then we renovate them, be our own contractor. And then we can show people and that also is why we like renovation so much, because we've been doing it for our own workspaces for so long.
Right.
But even when I worked in this office, it was too expensive because there was maintenance fees. So then I had a web designer and another friend was an industrial designer pay me to have a hot desk basically in this tiny spot. And then
Wow. That must have.
a web programmer. So it had 4 seats, but I was one. The other three were paying me 200 or 300 bucks a month. And then they're like, hey, you should do
some of the interest off that credit card.
yeah. And there's fees, and then one of them was a web designer, not for architects. That was more e-commerce, And then they're like, you should have a website. I'm like, who needs a website? Like, what's a website?
Right.
Like, well, can we like do Contra? We'll help you with a website. And then we can get some free rent. And so then that decision was such a significant thing to like have your name out there and some pictures, and I could update it myself. And we were hacked one time and I had to figure out the code myself of how we got hacked. And it was all homemade, like all code, just lines of code.
Yeah.
But and then I think I had to kick one of them out because got my very first student working for me was from Waterloo, and he introduced us to SketchUp, which transformed our practice. So that all the kind of newest stuff often seems to come from students who are on the cutting edge.
Of course, right?
And then I
The
went
schools
to
have the
two,
platform to be able to pay for it.
yeah, and we started to offer that as a service, and then but almost all so the practice started being in Western Living once, and then we got a project I did for some relatives, concrete and timber. The guy who I said call me with the facts, that house came out in Western Living, and I won an award, and that's why the practice started to grow. I had one employee, two employees, three.
Yeah.
And we were two to three for quite a few years in this tiny little space that really just was like a box that had not much of a view of a roof,
Yeah.
like like a New York light well. Then, we moved up to a bigger space when one came for sale, so I could start to seat more than. But even when we moved, we didn't go from 4 to 8 people because I needed room for eight. It was almost like if you made more space, it will just fill in. So yeah, it's been 20 years in this building, roughly quarters, like 5, 5, or 7, 7, and 7 in each of the spaces.
Yeah.
And I'm the chair of the building now. I'm kind of involved with any of the upkeep and building the elevators. And so just because I'm almost one of the longest term people here.
Yeah. And having to knock on people's doors while they're trying to evade and making payments for rent.
Yeah. Yeah, that's you
Yeah,
still.
you're that guy.
I've never been a landlord. I don't think I'd be good at that. But I've been on the other side and been a really terrible tenant, that's for sure.
Well, so I think that there's a lot more that I want to discuss with you. I mean, talking about the evolution of what the projects have looked like over the years and talking about staffing. I want to get into some of that, but I'm also cognizant of time. So I would say if we can, let's talk about if we can for a couple minutes. Let's talk about the evolution of what the projects have looked like over some of the years. Not necessarily the depths of those projects in entirety, but scales of project and how, as you've said, from one project to the next, it's kind of opened doors to new projects. And so what's that look like for you from a just an overall scale standpoint and number of
Um,
projects that you look after?
we were just doing a website update to actually add a catalog to show everything we can take a photo of or a model or a rendering, but the whatever happened with them, so not everything gets built. We, in all these years, have designed about 275, almost 300 projects. So
Wow.
that's sometimes in the early days, it's the bathrooms for someone.
Yeah.
Stuff doesn't go ahead for thousands of reasons. It's try out an idea, but probably trying to think how many have been built. Pushing 100 probably things are physically built.
Yeah.
I know maybe more, but we even just this week have been looking back and saying, hey, there's a little seeds of an idea of a current project that's under construction right now, but it started in like 2005 or 2007 for a job that didn't go ahead. So, but I would say the scale of the work, because I got licensed in coming up 10 years ago,
Yeah.
then we continue to do single family or small commercial or both small cultural little projects. 50-50 renovations. It juggles a little bit. So at any given time, some people have said they think we just do all new houses. Like, no, like sometimes we have 40% new houses, 60% renos, and the renos are expensive sometimes.
Yes.
We work common budgets would be between 300,000 and sort of 1.5 to 2 million.
Yeah.
As you're at 1.5 to 2 million, that's probably a new house, but we have new projects that are under a million. But at our busiest, we had 40 current projects at one time, um,
Wow.
an office of 10, 11, 12.
That's a
So,
lot of projects.
but one is maybe in permits, one is maybe close to done. So we're getting a few construction questions here and there.
Yeah.
But everyone can only actively draw one at a time, but usually it becomes two. So everyone here, we're very flat hierarchy. Young people, you take a smaller laneway house or a little commercial interior.
Yeah.
Doing a builder we like to work with, his office got flooded, so we're helping him with redo his office. So that's a good project for someone that's a little bit newer at this to work
Yeah.
with me.
Yeah.
But I think the sweet spot now is sort of 20 to 25 projects at a time.
Okay.
But, but I'm not going to get an email or phone call about all of those on Monday or Tuesday. But I'm going to read every email that's I'm CC'd on to the project architect on those things. So it's a lot. I'm churning through 100 to 150 emails a day
Yep.
that I have to read and likely don't have to take action on. But
You have
but
to
a big jump,
project
big jump.
process.
Yeah. And then design, I'm sitting down with someone almost constantly about design ideas. And we keep
Right.
design through construction because we're solving problems. Because I would say the construction stage is so fluidly connected to design for us. It doesn't mean we're changing our mind. It means someone's like, hey, can we do this? This is cheaper. Would you consider this? And then we're like, yeah, but if we do, we'll give you that if we can have this. It's like this constant negotiation.
Right.
And it's not even negotiation about money because a lot of our projects are cost plus. It's just to keep the cost down for our client's sake and to keep the project moving fast.
Yep.
But one milestone was I becoming a licensed architect. I was the first group of people to write the exact exams, which are now common in BC. So I was 42. At 40, I decided this is a joke. Like, why I started to have two people that worked for me. They're like, I love working here, but I can't get licensed because you're not licensed. So I'm going to go work over there. And like, that's a crappy reason to lose great people. So I got to get licensed. That was why. And then I wrote an exam, but like the pressure to not come back to your office and have failed an exam, like that's a lot of anxiety and a lot of pressure just to be like, I should know better than them, but I'm really level with them because they're all interns, right?
Yeah. Well, and you've got at this point a young family,
Yeah, I
right?
had three kids by
Right.
then.
So
Yeah.
there's that's a heavy position to be in at
Yeah.
that stage.
But it has been great, and I should have done it sooner. It's just that I had to again find a loophole where I would hire architects to supervise my projects, and they did everything according to the IBC rules. But really, I brought them to the party, and then that meant they supervised me, right? And so that was fairly complicated. And a friend down in Seattle, it's AIA Seattle, he helped me we worked together on a project. So then technically he supervised me on that one. But it did let us jump to bigger buildings, and
Right.
that's been great. But I don't. So we've done a 5 unit and a 12 unit, and done a lot of concept designs that for lots of different reasons. Sometimes rezoning things don't go through as planned, and that's why we're trying to rejiggle our website because we've actually worked on quite a bit larger buildings now and want to do more.
Yeah.
Uh, we're doing a public art gallery community center on Hornby Island, and phase two hopefully happens short right behind it.
Yep.
But you have to be a licensed architect to do that work. So the sweet spot would be to grow things to be 50% residential and 50% cultural. And multifamily, if I think there's a good fit with the developer.
Right.
We're doing some 4 units and even duplexes. I consider multifamily. So
Yeah.
but the growth, we hit a wall in terms of because I wasn't licensed, which I fixed that problem.
Mhm.
And but like the dream kind of project would be arts buildings and library buildings for
Right.
me because I like those kind of buildings so much and they're meaningful. And I spent a lot of time going to them as a kid. Every week, my mom would take us to the library. And so, libraries, galleries, things for arts.
I mean, they're
That,
they're foundation.
that's what we're heading towards.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean for anyone listening right now, just to provide some frame of reference, because as you've heard, Darcy has a pretty fun story, and and he's pretty humble about it all. But I mean, just to give a sense that there have been over the course of your practice, Darcy, you've won, I think it's what, close to almost 20 different awards, varying on scales.
Yeah.
You've been a juror for some awards.
Yes.
You have looking at magazines. I tried to do a count, but then I lost count. Your work has been published in multiple magazines all over. like all over in books, so newspapers, radio, and TV. Like it's just everywhere. And so I say all of this because if you've been listening to all of this, you can hear like the path to getting to where you're going is never always a straight line. And some people feel like there's a need to have that straight line. You say you should have looked at getting your certification earlier than 41 or 42. And I could tell you, it sounds like you were busy doing many other things leading to that point. And it was
Yeah.
probably ended up being at the time that you could afford to take the time to do it. So you couldn't have done
Yeah.
it any earlier than when you did it.
And
So
you kind of do. Well, I remember someone saying when they worked at an office one time that, like, the garbage finally got taken out when someone said, like, this is gross,
right,
right? Like, eventually things you get to a point like, okay, this has gone too far.
right.
Yeah.
And in the process, there's a lot of other things happening, you know.
Yeah.
You're not always putting something in that garbage. There are a lot of things happening until you have to throw something out. So I say this because I think it's important that anyone that's been in this business for a minute or they've been in it for 20 years acknowledge the fact that 30 years, 40 years, 50 years, it requires a relentless pursuit of wanting to improve upon who you are and what you're putting out and the people that you surround yourself with that allow you to be successful. There's a lot there, and I'm saying this, there's more that I do want to chat about with you on the topic of you and your practice that we don't have time for today. So, as I had mentioned to you before we started this recording, I think I'd like to do a part two. So
Sure. Yeah.
we will have to we'll set that up and we will release both back to back. So pay attention for part two, and I'll call it next week with Darcy. I want to thank you. I'm humbled to have learned all about this about you. I have been a big fan of your work since started working at Walden Homes. And when we build, we really we appreciate what fantastic architecture is and how it is put together and the pursuit of that. And I followed your work for some time, and I've been a big fan. This is a run-on sentence, so I should probably put the period there and say I look forward to picking up the conversation again with you and following through on some of the other topics I want to touch on with you. Thank you for taking and carving out time on a Saturday to have a chat with me about this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, you make it fun.
Thank you. Okay, well, so everyone, if you to again, just to make you aware, the podcast is available. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple, it's on YouTube. I think it's on iHeartRadio. When you're listening, please make sure that you go and you give it a 5-star rating. It just helps with the exposure to other people. You can follow our Instagram account at Behind the Build Podcast online. It's a blue logo with some white writing, and I say that because you'll be able to also see the feature on Darcy this week. There'll be photos of his work and some of the quotes from this listen. And lastly, if you're interested, obviously, go to his website, take a look, and you'll see all of the fantastic work that is being output by this practice, and it's exceptional. So thanks again, Darcy. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.